Well, a very good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our special virtual debate from Euronews, the latest in our series on the travel and tourism sectors in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. And this afternoon, in this particular debate, our fourth debate of the series, we're focusing in on Africa. The title of this particular debate is Africa-Europe Tourism, Ready for Recovery? And that's exactly the question we're going to be asking over the next 60 minutes or so. Is Africa ready to get on that road to recovery after the pandemic and also to revive its connections with Europe, which is, of course, a big source market for tourism? Africa was on a path to growth in tourism and travel up until this health crisis hit. So what's next? What are the challenges ahead? What are the opportunities? If you have any questions for the panel that I'm just about to introduce, then do leave them in the chat box just below the video screen where you're watching this debate this afternoon. I'll put some of those questions to our panel. Already had lots of questions in on our social media channels, particularly on Instagram, so I'll be getting around to some of those a bit later on as well. And I'd like to welcome both our audiences from Euronews and Africa News. I know you're both joining us this afternoon, so welcome along. So without further ado, let me introduce our great lineup of guests we've got for this debate this afternoon, focusing in on Africa. Let's go over to Johannesburg first. We've got the Chief Executive Officer of South African Tourism, Sisa Ntshona. Good afternoon to you, Sisa.
Good afternoon, Damon. How are you doing?
Nice to meet you. Nice to have you there in our debate. In Madrid, we've got Elcia Grandcourt, who's the Regional Director for Africa at the UNWTO, or the World Tourism Organization. Hello to you, Elcia.
Hi, Damon. How are you?
Nice to see you there. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. And also in another part of the world today, in Dubai, we've got Tim Cordon, who's the Area Senior Vice President for Middle East and Africa at the Radisson Hotel Group. Good afternoon to you, Tim.
Good afternoon, Damon. Good to be here. Thanks.
Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Well, as I was saying in the introduction there, Africa was on this sort of path to growth in travel and tourism before the COVID-19 pandemic hit earlier this year, but things are certainly looking much more uncertain now. Elcia, from the UNWTO, I'd like to start with you because you've done some research in this area. Just talk us through the actual impact that the pandemic has had on Africa as a whole and how this is probably going to influence things going forward.
Thank you again. Good afternoon, Damon, and thanks for having UNWTO once again in this series. I would rather start because we've just launched our barometer for this quarter in regards to the results of the international figures and then zero in on Africa. Just to quote a little bit what we've recently launched in regards to travel, especially near the complete lockdown that experience in the past few months in response to the pandemic. This has led to about 98% fall in the international tourism numbers in May when we compare to 2019. And our result shows also a 56% year-on-year drop in tourism arrivals between January and May. And this translates into a fall of 300 million tourists and $320 billion lost in international tourism receipts, which is more than 3 times the loss of the global economic crisis of 2019. And if you put the slide that I've shared with you earlier, just to show a little bit where we are for Africa, if we could have the slide, please. Yeah, as you rightly said in the very beginning, Africa indeed was on a positive trajectory growth in the past years. January to May last year, 2019, we were at 6% growth. But of course, with this pandemic, we've seen this drastic change and drop where it puts us at minus 47%, as you can see on the graph showing for the Africa region in terms of international tourist arrivals from January to May this year. And this drastic fall in the tourism, of course, places millions of jobs and livelihoods at risk. So that's why it's important to consider to restart tourism when it's safe to do so. And primarily, this is what our Secretary General has been advocating through the Global Crisis Committee that we bring together the private sector stakeholders, other UN agencies such as WHO, ICAO, and other private sector agencies and countries across regions of the world is primarily to discuss how governments can work together, not only to have a look at how to restart tourism, but also how to prioritize health, safety measures, and then also to look at protecting jobs and businesses.
Elcia, thank you very much indeed for that. It's quite staggering, some of those figures that you're showing us there about the impact of the pandemic on tourist arrivals. Let's go over to Johannesburg and Sisa, who's the CEO of South African Tourism. Sisa, when we hear about those figures and the impact on Africa, I mean, it really is quite shocking, isn't it? Could you ever imagine that this kind of thing was going to happen to your industry?
Absolutely not, Damon. I keep on telling people that before COVID, I had an afro. Now I've got no hair. Essentially, I think that's been the disaster that this whole pandemic has set for us. Absolutely right. I mean, the figures that were shown earlier on, that we were growing at 6%, as a continent in 2019, and now we're actually down 47%. I suppose the good things to take from that one is that last year we are outpacing global growth. And then this year we actually are less hit as an average, of the world. I think it's 52% down, and we are 47% down. Africa has got such a huge reliance basically on international travel. And, as the pandemic itself is literally brought everyone to a screeching halt. The issue now becomes about how then do we start to reopen the sector when it is safe to do so. And we've got to be mindful of a couple of things. The first one is look at each country as to how they're managing the pandemic themselves. Because in order for you to be attractive to the world, you got to sort out your home first, your back, as it were, right? And then after that, start to look in terms of then how do you start to engage with the world? We certainly have a view that the recovery, as it were, will be led inside out, starting off with domestic, then regional, then international. It's about gaining of confidence. It's about regaining of trust that people are able to travel to all parts of the world, including Africa, in a safe and secure environment.
And these are really big words you're using there, the trust and confidence words, Sisa, because these are run through all of the debates that we've done here on Euronews about travel and tourism. And the difficulty we've always said during these debates about this particular crisis is that it's not a crisis that has happened and then has gone away and then you recover. It's a crisis that seems to sort of hold large over countries for a long time, and we still don't know where the end of it might be. I know, for example, in South Africa now that the COVID-19 virus is still spiking, you still have a big issue there. I mean, how difficult is it to even start to think about sort of an international recovery when you don't actually know when this virus is really going to go away?
Sure. I mean, this is a global phenomenon, and it's not an Africa problem or South Africa problem. It's actually all of us. It's an industry problem. And, we've got to look at it that with each day that goes by, there's new data points that come through. The Northern Hemisphere at the moment is in the peak season, which is the summer season, and we're learning a lot from them. What to do and also what not to do as well. So that as we evolve, the environment is so fluid that once you think you have it, things, kind of change quite fundamentally. So when I talk about global unity of the sector itself, it's about saying that each country, yes, can implement its own best practice of health protocols, but at some point in time, we need a universally adapted one so that as a tourist, you can walk with confidence or travel with confidence anywhere around the world where those standards are essentially met. Now, we are all in different phases of the pandemic itself. And as you've rightfully said, that South Africa is actually now in its, what I call a very upward trajectory towards our peak. And we are anticipating that we'll reach our peak about late August, early September, where we'll then flatten out. And then, we are over the hill, as it were, to start to kind of say, what do we need to put in place? The conversation about, the recovery, as it were, starts now. It's about what are we doing right now that will actually put us in a better position once the gates are open, as it were.
Okay, Sisa, we'll be talking a little bit more about that, obviously, when the gates are open a little later on in this debate. Let's go over to Dubai in the meantime, to Tim Cordon, who's from the Radisson Hotel Group. Oh, Tim, I know that your hotel company has lots of hotels and resorts in Africa, you know, one of the continents that you manage. How damaging has it been for your business so far?
Well, I agree with the comments from Elcia and Sisa, because there's really no historical precedent for the dimension of this crisis. It's been somewhat of a catastrophe for our business. And for us, initially, it was about how do you treat the human aspects? Because first and foremost, this was a safety and security crisis, a humane crisis. And our initial attention was, how do we protect our guests? How do we protect our teams? And how do we protect our buildings, our hotels? And then that quickly became a commercial crisis and indeed a liquidity crisis. So then it was, how do we have a plan in each and every hotel to make sure that we're protecting the cash assets that the hotel has, and how long can that last before a liquidity problem becomes a solvency problem? We're a huge employer, to Elcia's point earlier on. We have over 15,000 employees on the continent today. And that's just the direct employees in the hotels. Our supply chain probably can be 3 or 4 times that number. So the economic impact is incredibly severe. So we certainly think that reopening countries when it's safe to do so is going to be imperative to recovery for tourism in Africa.
So in terms of, Tim, in terms of the hotels that you have in Africa right now, I mean, how many of them are really trading? What sort of proportion, percentage? And, is it quite difficult? Because Africa is a huge continent, right? And the different circumstances in different countries.
Yeah, I totally agree. I was just coming to that. The situation in South Africa and the Southern Hemisphere countries is quite different from the situation in Northern Hemisphere countries. So what we see today, we've got about 100 hotels on the continent, either in operation or under development. And the operational hotels, we only have 8 that aren't operating right now today. But the level they're operating at is massively different. In Nigeria, we've been able to capture quite a lot of local business, and they're operating quite well, occupancies that are comparable to last year even. Whereas in other countries like Kenya or South Africa, the hotel business is almost closed. And of course, no business plan can be successful on 0 income. So we've had to really challenge ourselves about how we can get through this crisis and make sure that we come out the other side with a sustainable model.
Okay, Tim, thank you very much indeed for now. If you're just joining us, you're just watching this debate from Euronews. This is Africa-Europe tourism ready for recovery? That's the question we're asking this afternoon. And if you have any questions as our audience for the panel that you're seeing on your screen, do leave them in the box just below the video where you're watching, in the chat box there. I'll get round to them to ask some of those a bit later on. Got some questions from Instagram as well that I'll be putting to our panel in a few minutes. Elcia from the UNWTO in Madrid, if I could just go back to you. You were mentioning earlier in your answer about the impact that the pandemic has had on travel and tourism, the fact that a lot of livelihoods, the economies of Africa rely on tourism so much. We heard that from Sisa as well. What are you doing as an organisation, as the UNWTO, to try to bring some sort of sense of recovery, a revival, some sense of plan for Africa to try and get things moving again?
Yeah, I mean, as was mentioned, this is indeed a global pandemic. So first of all, what our Secretary General did, as I mentioned earlier, he brought together other UN agencies, as well as member states, as well as private sector stakeholders around the table to discuss really what is the way forward, how can we map out some guidelines to be able to support countries across a region all around. And what we have done is we issued a set of recommendations, then followed by specific guidelines to our member states. We've also put together, because in the Africa region, a lot of the work that we have been doing has been related to technical support to member states to help them with the development of the tourism sector. So this technical recovery package, as we call it, is centered around 3 pillars. Is looking more at the economic recovery aspect of the pandemic. And we've also got the part that looks at the marketing and promotion of it, as well as the institutional strengthening. So around these 3 pillars, this is what we putting across to our members so that when they look at their specific situation, they can we can better analyze together with them which are the areas that they want to tackle first. And as Sisa mentioned earlier, different countries are at different levels, and we know in the Africa region, different countries, tourism are seen in the national economy at different levels. So for that reason, we have to have several discussions with the different members who has shown us the interest in regards to this recovery package that we want to assist them with. And also we've been working with all our partners because there is also the issue of financing, which is very critical, especially in this time. And we've been able to manage to bring some sort of financial support to certain member states based on the different partners that we work with in order to be able to support members as they start to relaunch the tourism sector. But also importantly, as Sisa and Tim mentioned, it's important to look at the health protocols and safety protocols that are there in place, because before welcoming people to the borders, we need to ensure that they also feel confident when they are there. If there is a second wave, if there is an issue that they somehow catch this virus, that the country is ready indeed to be able to take care of them, be it to repatriate or to take care of them on the ground. So all of this has been consultative and working very closely with the different governments, with the tourism ministries, as well as with the tourism boards and all the other stakeholders that we work with.
Elcia, yeah, you touched on a very important point there about infrastructure, particularly health infrastructure. I think a lot of tourists traveling into Africa would want to know that that was in place, that if something did go wrong, that they could be looked after. I think that is a big part of the confidence and trust issue. A lot of this, you touched on it briefly about governments, talking to governments. A lot of this also relies on political will, doesn't it?
Totally. I mean, tourism as a sector itself in Africa, it's only of recent years that we've seen countries really shifting and looking at a sector, at tourism as an economically viable sector. And of course, if you don't have political will from the head, it's very difficult because, as you know, with tourism, you don't see the results translating overnight. There's a lot of work that has to be put behind. There's a lot of infrastructure because you need to bring other agencies on board, other ministries on board. We talk about air transport, so the airline, environment, all these different line ministries has to work together to be able to set this up. And definitely, the key message that we're putting across is to continue to work together in solidarity, to exchange the best practices, because we have seen as countries have launched their health protocols, some of them, to restart the tourism sector. There are others who are still preparing theirs, are picking ideas from what those that have started ahead to be able to learn the best practices from there. But a lot lies with the leadership. And this is where it's very critical in order to be able to have a recovery all around for all the sectors.
Okay, Elcia from the UNWTO, thank you very much indeed for now. Let's go back to Johannesburg and the CEO of South African Tourism, Sisa. Sisa, we were hearing there about sort of government's involvement in all of this, the political will, the political support. How important is tourism seen in South Africa, and how important is it right now? What resources are going into trying to kind of plan its future to get it back up and running after this pandemic has cleared the way, hopefully, in South Africa over the next few months?
Yeah, I think the trend, what's been happening in the whole of the continent of Africa, is that we are all diversifying our economies, our revenue streams as countries, away from extractive mineral resources to the more sustainable services side. And certainly tourism forms part of that pillar. In South Africa specifically, it is part and parcel of our National Development Plan, which is basically our key goal of where we want to be as a country in 2030. So that sits in the center from that perspective. The tension that lies at the moment is when government has to make those very difficult decisions of actually shutting down a country and shutting down a sector. And as Tim had said, is that you are now stuck with actually having an operation that is there, but it's not allowed to operate. But that doesn't mean, however, that there is no costs that are being incurred on a daily basis to keep those businesses open, in terms of operating without a revenue line in itself. And there lies in the tension, So part of the first phase of managing the pandemic, you've got to look after your supply side. Because if you don't do that, you may wake up in 6 months' time when you're all ready to operate and look backwards. You don't have a sector to speak of because all of it would have deteriorated. So you got on one hand, protect the country, make sure that you get on top of the pandemic. At the same time, keep your eye on that supply side to make sure that it doesn't deteriorate and to also make sure that you're able to operate, and so that when the time is right and you've kind of contextualize it. I think also kind of said that we are all in different phases of this pandemic. Some already over the hill, some are actually spiking up. But each and every single activity that happens globally is a data point that all of us can use in terms of putting it into our mix and finding, sustainable solutions. Because whilst the pandemic is the same coronavirus, the country's responses need to be bespoke to its internal conditions. South Africa right now is in a space where we have what we call this communal spreading. And that's where we kind of need to arrest that and make sure that, we can emerge out of this stronger than what we came in.
I know you're not a scientist, and I know that sort of the COVID-19 pandemic is spiking in South Africa at the moment, but I was reading one European newspaper headline this morning saying South Africa's tourism industry is on indefinite hold. That's not kind of the headline you really want, I guess, in terms of promoting South Africa, but it's where you are in this global pandemic. You're basically closed down to international arrivals. Is it too early to say when you hope to be able to ease border restrictions and to welcome people back?
Look, I have a view about that one. I think we are all learning as the world, and I don't think anyone has answers at the moment. Again, it would be very irresponsible of us as a country and very short-sighted to say, let's open now and actually create a bigger problem down the line. I think in the longer term is that how countries respond and handle the pandemic will actually set them up in terms of how they recover from the perspective. So whilst we're not able to tell you exactly when we're able to operate, it is when the epidemiological evidence gives us a bit of comfort that actually we've got the pandemic under control and we're able to manage it. What is actually happening around the world at the moment is that all the bilateral relationships that existed before, it's kind of really been obsolete, right? They've really kind of been decimated. And right now, each and every single country is looking at all the other countries and either classifying them into red, yellow, or green. Green being happy to travel to because they perceived as safe. Yellow is iffy and red is no. We are all trying to make sure that our countries are not in that red category. And it is how we manage the pandemic right now that determine, how long we stay in the different phases. And it's very quick. I mean, we've seen what's happened between the UK and Spain as an example, where literally last week it was all green and then suddenly moved to yellow. So we've got to be cognizant of all of that to make sure that we project the image to the world that we have mementos under control.
Okay, so we had a couple of questions on Instagram. One was, when can we fly to South Africa again? When will South Africa's international borders reopen? So hopefully the two people that sent those in, hopefully that helps to answer those questions. But clearly it's a forever changing picture, very fluid at the moment in terms of when people might be welcome back to South Africa from international other countries. Let's go back to Tim Cordon from Radisson Hotel Group in Dubai. Tim, we were hearing there about this sort of red, yellow, green. We've heard about these travel corridors, travel bubbles, being able to go to some countries, not other countries. This is all really confusing for tourists and travellers, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. There's no question that there's a lot of confusion out there at the moment. If I just take a second to talk about a country that's not in Africa or Europe, but Dubai, that opened its borders on the 7th of July for international tourism. And even in that short period, we've seen 2 or 3 changes to how tourism should be treated. So it is an ever-changing, ever-evolving situation, and we've had to be very quick with our reactions to that and how we host business at our hotels. And I think the recovery, as we said earlier, really starts with confidence. Once people have a bit of confidence that they're going to be safe when they travel, then I think the demand is going to start to be stimulated. But as we've already said, this can't happen until the borders start to open, and that shouldn't be done until it's safe to do so. What we want to see, if I can just talk about South Africa for a moment, because we'll focus on that just momentarily, is that I'd really like to see South Africa reopen, but I want it to happen, as everybody does, I'm sure, in a sustainable and safe way, so that we don't open and then have to lock down again, because that will be even more damaging than having a sustained lockdown now and then reopening in a sensible way. And I really hope that will happen towards the end of this year, when the summer is in South Africa, and that's peak tourism season, and it would be commercially very important, let's say, that we get at least part of that season. And what we've seen is that forward bookings and demand for that period are actually quite high. So the demand is there, but will we be able to realise that demand? Well, that's a question that we don't know the answer to yet, because it's going to take a lot of work to get this virus under control and the borders back open between Europe and South Africa in this case.
But when you say that there's been this demand, I mean, that's not sort of confirmed paid for bookings, is it?
No, it's inquiries. So what we see is we have people saying, I would like to book a holiday, or I'd like to book a trip to South Africa. And nobody's doing that today for tomorrow. But when we look at the demand profile out in October, November, and December towards the end of the year, Q4, actually the demand looks quite strong. I mean, I want to couch that in terms of the 2020 version of quite strong. It's behind 2019, but certainly compared to other countries we've seen, it looks good. So that's an indicator to me that if the borders open and if South Africa is able to get their pandemic under control, which I'm sure they will, that we could have quite an okay summer season in the fourth quarter of this year down in South Africa. Because what hasn't changed about South Africa and Africa generally is it's a fantastic place to visit. There are amazing facilities and incredible sights to see and wonderful experiences that you can have on the continent of Africa. And that's not gone away. That's still there, and it will still be there after the pandemic. So a question of recovery for me isn't when, or so isn't how, or even if, it's when will the recovery start, because Africa is a fantastic place to visit, and I'm sure it always will be.
And in your hotels, Tim, across Africa, I mean, where are people coming from generally? Is it mainly Europe, but is there also a lot of tourism going on within the continent? I mean, where can you see the demand coming back probably first? And then is it, for example, going to be demand within Africa and then European and international arrivals? How will it work, do you think?
Yeah, as Sisa was saying, Africa generally depends upon international business. It has a limited amount of inter-regional travel, although it is there. It is there. I mean, Nigeria, as the second largest economy in Africa, has probably more inter-regional travel business than any other country. South Africa also has an element of corporate business between the commercial hub of Johannesburg, Western Cape, Cape Town, Durban, and so on. But it's not enough to sustain the industry, that's for sure. So international business is very important. And Europe is the biggest feeder market for our hotels in the continent by a clear margin. Within that, UK, Germany, the major economies in Europe driving the way. And when I was talking about those South African inquiries earlier, that they're predominantly from the UK, actually.
Okay, that's really interesting to know. Thank you very much indeed, Tim, from the Radisson Hotel Group for now. You're just watching this debate, Africa-Europe tourism, ready for recovery from Euronews. I'd like to welcome our viewers from Euronews and Africa News this afternoon. If you have any questions, do leave them in the chat box just below the video screen where you're watching, and I'll get those to the panel over the next few minutes. Elcia Grandcourt from the UNWTO, the World Tourism Organization. Let's go back to you in Madrid. We just heard Tim there talking about the importance of tourists and travelers coming from Europe into Africa. What's the UNWTO doing in terms of talking to Brussels, the EU, about kind of getting these flows of tourists coming back in the future? Because, you know, the EU has a safe list, doesn't it, along with the UK and other countries?
Yes, indeed. As we have seen with this pandemic, we say it's something that is new. We all trying to adapt with all the situations that are happening. But of course, as different countries have imposed the different measures and the different bodies around are also putting advisories, we see that for Africa, of course, the source market is not going to be on the first to be on the rebound, but more the domestic and the intra-regional travel. So what on the one hand, as at the level of our Secretary General, the discussions is being done with these other countries to ensure that when the travel bans are issued, we always say that it has to be verified, it's geo-referenced, but now that we know it's a pandemic, of course, the measures are based on the different health protocols that we are seeing and how ready the country is to be able to manage the situation. As such, we continue to encourage countries to at least have the basic health protocols and safety issues that is being discussed in order to be able to help reopen the borders. But at the same time, to also rethink, because we know that long haul travel is not going to happen immediately, but rather to put the focus on domestic tourism. But in order to do that, as it's been said, it might not necessarily have been the stronger part of it, but there is the potential there, because in the past it has been neglected. It has been neglected and not a lot of effort has been done there in terms of the pricing, in terms of being able to get our own people to enjoy our own local assets that we have. A lot of people, if you would ask, you will stop 2 or 3 people down the road and ask them what do they know about their own country or the continent. They might not necessarily be able to tell you that, because everybody's been focusing on getting outside of the country, whereas we've got such a lot of good things going on in Africa for us ourselves to take R&R, rest and relax, visiting friends and relatives. And these are all the possibilities that now we can tap into to increase and give more prominence to the domestic market.
Domestic market is very important for a lot of countries as they look to recover and revive themselves after this pandemic, something we've heard from other countries as well. I just want to get back to the point there. You were talking about these sort of standards for health and safety that countries should be putting in place, the protocols. I've heard a lot of people calling for a world-class standard that everybody can follow. That's not really there right now, is it, in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic? Countries and different unions of countries are doing different things, aren't they?
I think it would be in this moment that we are, when things are still evolving and countries are at different levels, for us to have this. Because if you compare it when we had the issues with the terror attacks, for example, before we were able to have a set guidelines in terms of the security protocols to be done at the airport, it took a while. And I believe the same thing is going to evolve with this current situation that we are now at, because it's a virus that we are still understanding, it's still evolving, but at least having the guidelines as we are directed by the WHO, by all the different organizations, ICAO and UNWTO itself, to try to align this. But for you to say right now, I think we have to be a bit careful because of the evolving nature of this situation. But the fact remains that we still have to have the degree of health protocols from the get-go as we board the airline, through the airport, through the arrivals, and as you go out to enjoy the different services that are there.
Okay, Elcia from the UNWTO, thank you for that. Let's go back to Sisa from South African Tourism in Johannesburg. So we're talking there about the health and safety protocols, measures put in place to reassure people, to keep people safe. So what are you doing in South Africa in that respect? And how are you hoping that will boost confidence amongst tourists and travelers in terms of coming to your country?
Yeah, I mean, if you ever doubted that the world is one global village, I think the pandemic has showed us that. And again, it is whilst the development of the protocol is starting at country level, at some point in time, it will need to be aggregated basically at global standard level so that we all know and are playing off the same hymn sheet. What happened in South Africa is that the tourism sector actually took the initiative and looked to what we call de-risk themselves, because previously they were rated quite low in terms of when they would become operational again. So the introduction of health protocols and operational protocols, helped to de-risk the sector, and they've been moved up quite significantly up to when they're allowed to operate. So domestic market has been open since 1st of June, but only for business travel and essential travel. So it is in part of that process of easing up the sector and the opening around it. And I think, as Tim had absolutely said, is that, yes, you are opening it up slowly, but it's nowhere near enough to be able to cater for the needs of the sector in order for it to be self-sufficient from that perspective. So it's something that, we've been looking at it. We are all in need for some form of endorsement or some form of ratification or validation, basically, on global standards. And again, as we saw, the WTTC is kind of overlooking or overseeing a couple of these protocols, and they're giving, their vote of support. And I think that's kind of needs an acceleration now as, more and more countries start to open up to international travelers.
So the world standards may be a little way off yet, maybe a few more months. So what are you doing in the meantime in South Africa? For example, what are you encouraging your tourism businesses to do to kind of boost those health and safety measures? And how are you going to communicate those outside of South Africa to actually encourage the people to come back?
Absolutely. So the first one is, as I said, the sector came up with the protocols themselves, and they are self-monitoring. And that's an undertaking that they wanted to do, to say, actually, let us come up with these and we'll evaluate and measure ourselves and make sure that we keep up with the standards. Secondly, as well, because tourism is going to be started off by domestic, we had to go on specific campaigns to actually inform and educate, the public out there about the protocols put in place, the intended impact of them, and how to actually assess them, so that people are able to again engage with tourism activities, with confidence and an element of trust. And this is going to be a ripple effect. It'll start off slowly, but once the momentum starts to gain, basically, I think you'll start to see the engine warming up, as it were, and then you start to get on that full swing. You touched earlier on around the importance of domestic tourism. What this pandemic has given us from an Africa operators is an opportunity to restack all of this. Because we're a bit later on relative to other countries around the world in actually acknowledging, recognizing the impact of tourism, to our economies, is that, it's our stacking up is the other way around. We've got a strong international market in terms of tourism and a much weaker domestic one. We want to correct that right now as to start to kind of re-emerge ourselves back into the world, sort out domestic, get that all strong, make sure that the tourism products are able to respond to domestic demand. And by the way, in the short term, there is no choice but to look for revenue streams there. Then look at the continent. We've got 54 countries on the continent. We've got to look at each other as sources of business, essentially, and then stack up to international for long-haul traveling, essentially.
Okay, Sisa, thank you very much indeed for that insight. Let's go over to Tim again, the Radisson Hotel Group, who's in Dubai for us this afternoon. Tim, it keeps coming back to this question of trust and confidence amongst passengers, amongst travellers, amongst tourists. Within your hotels, what are you doing to boost trust and confidence? I can't imagine going on holiday in one of your resorts with gloves and a mask on will be much fun.
Yeah, you're right. It's been a difficult balance to strike. But what we did, we partnered with an expert, a company called SGS, who are one of the world's leading testing and verification agencies. And with their help, them and a laboratory with some epidemiologists, we defined 20 key protocols that every single hotel globally in our organization needs to implement. And those 20 protocols deal with everything from guest arrival to the guest stay, what PPE staff should be using, what PPE guests should be using, how the employee even comes to work, and how do we make sure that's safe. And those protocols are really clear for everybody to understand, our guests, our owners, and our employees, and you can find them anywhere on our website. And I think that shows that we can not only offer a safe stay, somewhere where people can feel like they're confident they're not going to be impacted by this virus, but also I think we found the right balance between being able to offer that safe stay, but also an enjoyable one, because ultimately hotels and tourism should be about providing amazing experiences. And I think we found a way to provide a great experience with a reasonable level of, let's say, interference into what we were doing pre-COVID. And guest acceptance to that so far in the countries where we've already reopened has been extremely high. In the same way that 20 years ago, you probably would have thought it was quite strange that not to be able to travel on an airplane without a pair of scissors or a full bottle of water, whereas now it's completely normal. Everyone accepts that that's just the way it is. And I think that's going to be the new normal, an often used phrase, for hotel stays as well.
And you're having to be creative and innovative, really, in terms of how you adapt.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've used a lot of technology, certainly. So online check-in is become something, or contactless check-in even further, is something that we're rolling out extremely quickly. Contactless checkout as well. So we're trialing a system right now where you get a WhatsApp message actually saying, this is what your bill looks like. If everything's okay, reply with a yes, and we're going to charge your card and we'll email you the receipt. So really speeding up people's efficiency of their stay, but also not having to interact with too many people. So they can choose, their own way out of the hotel and not having to handle key cards or sign too many pieces of paper or hand credit cards over. So minimizing those guest contact areas for the obvious reason that we don't want to transmit the pandemic.
But COVID or not, I mean, these are kind of lasting changes to your business that you could kind of keep long term, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, any crisis brings with it some opportunity. And the opportunity for us is to accelerate the acceptance of those technological innovations, let's say, as opposed to trying to blend them in gradually and looking for guest acceptance. I think we've got an opportunity to accelerate them because guest acceptance is going to be much, much higher. That's not to say we won't offer a more normal service for the guests that need that, and we'll do that in a safe way as well. But giving the choice for those customers is, I think, imperative.
Okay, Tim, thank you very much indeed for now. You're watching Africa Europe Tourism, ready for recovery, the latest in our special series of virtual debates from Euronews. Welcome to our Euronews and Africa News audiences that are watching this afternoon. Hello to Ron Chow, Chutu Ram, Nadira Parbin, and MD. I can see you're all watching live. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Elcia at the UNWTO, the World Tourism Organization in Madrid. I'm just going to fire one of these questions at you. I'm not sure whether you're going to know the answer in detail, but people are asking, when is Africa going to restart tourism overall? When are we going to be able to go back to Africa? This comes back to this kind of original questions about borders, right? We heard a little bit about South Africa earlier, but it's a very mixed picture right now, isn't it?
Indeed it is. We are monitoring because for the first time in history, when we started this pandemic, we saw that it was over 90% of countries had introduced travel bans and travel restrictions. And admittedly, where we are now with this situation, as we've seen in Europe, some countries start to open and then again, they had to close again. I think in Africa, as Sisa mentioned, in South Africa, they now at the sort of, you can call the peak of this pandemic because of the weather situation as well. There are other countries that are gearing up now to be able to reopen the borders. So the key message that we are sending is to restart tourism, but to ensure that it's safe. When we say safe, of course, we are talking about several things here. It has to be in terms of the cases that is recorded in the different regions and the different countries. And of course, we have, because this situation is impacting on all sectors of the economy, and somehow we need to keep the motor going. So that is why the encouragement that we are giving out to our members, to the different countries, is as and when gradually they are able to open the borders to do so. And that is why it's very important to keep to the global guidelines that has been established, of course, by us, by WHO, by ICAO and WTTC that Sisa mentioned. A lot of countries are coming to us with their own protocols that they have rolled out and asking us also to validate it for them. So we take time, we look at each and every one, and if there are areas where we tell them that they need to put some more consideration, we do so. But again, also always with caution, advising that since it's an evolving situation, these protocols, we need to keep relooking at it. It needs to keep being re-updated. But as we know, our expert has said that long-haul travels could be on the rebound as far as the last quarter of 2021 or early 2021. So definitely that's why we talked about earlier that what countries are looking at right now is more of the domestic situation. But of course, everything has to be done gradually and in consultation.
Elcia, we've talked a lot about domestic tourism and a lot about international tourists and travelers coming into Africa from outside. But one question we had on Instagram from one of our viewers was saying, we are in South Africa and we want to travel to Europe and not on expensive repatriation flights that we can't afford. There is the other side of this, isn't there? There are people in Africa that want to come to Europe right now.
Totally. I mean, it works either ways, because in this situation, we've seen a lot of tourists that were stranded already, or workers that want to go back to their own countries. And we've seen the countries has been trying to manage repatriation flights. And that is why some borders has been open, but with caution. But to welcome the general public tourists for holidays, this, of course, has to be done gradually. And yes, it is both ways, because in addition to just being able to catch a flight to arrive in your destination, there is also the issue of testing, because a lot of countries is asking that at least you have the PCR test done 72 hours before you arrive. So it's quite a complex situation that we are finding ourselves in at the moment. And that is why we should continue to communicate, share information, and try as best to come out of this situation, because we do need to restart. But of course, we have to take into consideration all of these points that we've mentioned.
Learning all the time, I think, all countries around the world right now with this unprecedented health crisis. Elcia, thanks for that. Let's go back to Sisa, Chief Executive Officer at South African Tourism. I suppose, Sisa, when you look to the future in terms of reviving and recovering the travel and tourism sectors, there are probably going to have to be certain things that you do adapt specifically. Let's take a very simple example. I know that in South Africa, you have some lovely, luxurious safari stays and holidays and adventures that people can go on. If they're typically attracting sort of an older clientele, older clients, and we hear that COVID, particularly affects older people, how will you have to start to adapt the way that you run tourism and you run these sorts of tours and adventures? And are you going to have to market to different people, or are you going to look after this older generation in a better way? How is it going to work?
I think, Damien, you've been listening to my management meetings, because we simply had a whole conversation around it the other day. The key word here is about diversification, right? Part of the problem is that if you look at your tourist arrivals into the country and you've got concentration risk in a specific country, as an example, that's going to be a problem for you should something happen with that country. So as an example, if the UK comprises such a huge percentage of our arrivals and the UK decides to shut its borders, we are left naked, as it were. So therefore, COVID gives us an opportunity then to start to recalibrate our relationships and also start to diversify as to which countries and the level of contribution in terms of tourist arrivals become key. Now, within there is to look at the segments. You're absolutely right, is that our really high-end five-star luxury type of resorts have really been supported by the elderly, not so time-conscious type of traveler. We now have to pivot that twofold. One, through data, through insights, through intelligence, we need to understand what consumer behavior is going to look like going forward. And by the way, it's a moving bus, because on a daily basis, that is changing, because the tourist of today is also taking in new data points every single day in terms of forming what it is that they want. So we are literally chasing what it is, and more importantly, trying to anticipate what the tourist wants as well. And then secondly, once you have that, then you become a lot more sharper, a lot more deliberate as to which segments you start to kind of profile. So that when you start to talk about German tourists, you're not speaking about German tourists in a kind of very wide angle. You're speaking gender, you're speaking from a specific area, you're speaking age region as an example. So therefore, once you've got that pinned down, how you market to them or how you show up will be very different based on the different market segments as well. Ultimately, tourism is about spend, right? We are all looking to increase the contribution of tourism to our GDPs. So you do want the volume, but you also want the value that comes with those volumes as well. So it's going to be a really good portfolio balance in terms of how you restack your visitor arrivals, going forward.
And Sisa, how are you trying to kind of revive the connectivity in terms of getting people to come back to South Africa? What's it like with the aviation picture at the moment? Because you'll know that in Europe it's been a very difficult situation. Some airlines have almost gone bust. They've had to ask for money from governments, and they're not running anywhere near as many flights as they were originally. What's the situation like there, and what do you hope will happen in the international aviation sector?
Sure. So first of all, is we cannot make an assumption that the airlines that flew to South Africa previously will exist, number one. Number two is that we can't assume that the frequencies that they did will also continue going forward. So it's really everyone starting from a zero base and building up from the perspective there. It is all about, again, engaging and giving comfort and confidence to airlines as when we'll be ready to start to kind of interact together. Now, South Africa geographically is too far down south, from the major source markets. So we are a long haul destination essentially. And I think as Elcia has said, is that long haul will take a bit longer to recover. Now, we've got to quickly get to a point to understand then, in terms of the long haul recovery, which markets are most likely to actually come online first, and specifically target them to start to create those corridors as they come through. The good thing about Europe is that Europe is relatively small, so you could start with kind of one, entry into Europe and, suck everyone else in, with kind of connecting flights into there as well. We also need to start to understand, again, what does the new or COVID environment tourist look like, right? Is it still attractive to hub through the likes of the largest kind of airport in the world in terms of traffic, such as Dubai, as was previously? Or do you think the consumer of today is looking for point-to-point, or rather hubbing through smaller airports? So all of that's got to go into the mix. And again, all driven by what we assume the consumer is looking for.
Okay, Sisa, thank you very much indeed. Let's go over to Tim again in Dubai at the Radisson Hotel Group. We were talking a little bit there, weren't we, about the post-COVID pandemic behaviour of passengers, of travellers, of tourists in the new normal, the new world that will come after all of this. Do you think that generally people's holidays and tourism aspirations will change? We've heard a lot of experts and analysts talking about the sort of sustainability issues, maybe people wanting to travel closer to home. Maybe they won't want to go from Europe to Africa in the future. I mean, how do you see this pandemic impacting the trends and behaviours of people?
Well, first and foremost, I think people will still want to travel. They'll still want to have those amazing experiences that they can't get at home. And Africa is extremely well placed to take advantage of that. One trend that I think we may see emerge or accelerate from an existing trend is a demand for ecotourism or tourism in more remote destinations. Again, Africa is really well placed to put itself at the forefront of that trend. But I think that's something that we'll see probably emerge over the next 3 or 4 years as people want to go off the beaten track even further into more isolated places as they perceive to be a little bit safer. Not necessarily the case, but definitely the perception would be it's a little bit safer and more sustainable. So it's a trend we've seen over the last couple of years, but I imagine that'll accelerate now as we move forwards into a post-pandemic era.
Okay, Tim, thank you. We've just got a few minutes left before we wrap up this debate. And if you've been watching our debate so far, you'll know that I always set our guests some homework. Some get pretty nervous about this, some get very excited about it. I ask all of our guests to bring a personal item with them that they think symbolises travel and tourism and the importance of its revival now after this pandemic. Let's go to Elcia at the UNWTO first in Madrid. What have you brought for us, and tell us about it?
Yeah, indeed, Tim. If you look in the background, I already tried to set this up because I believe traveling to Africa, you expect something very vibrant, starting with the culture, Of course, we touched a bit on environment, the big five, as you see behind me. But what touches me the most are these little mementos that are made from debris that you pick off the beach, that you've all heard about it, I'm sure, one way or the other. And these are made from the flip-flops that have been picked off the beach. It's very vibrant, showing again the big five, but at the same time, it's telling us to buy local because it does help support the economy, especially impacting on the local communities. And it's a lovely memento to keep in your house, full of colors, reminding you that, yes, we will travel again. And when the time is right for us to be able to enjoy what Mother Nature has given all of us.
You've got a giraffe there. What's the other one you have? What's the other animal?
That's the hippo.
Oh, the hippo. I thought it was.
Yeah.
I didn't want to insult it if it was a different animal. Thank you very much indeed for bringing that. Let's go over to Sisa in Johannesburg. What have you brought for us this afternoon?
Yeah, I'm an accountant, so I'm typically very practical.
You brought some money.
What I brought was my passport, right? First of all, I miss using it, right? It's kind of a stale. That's the first part. And secondly, you know, this is my license to actually travel the world. And this is one document I think is going to be going through quite a significant revolution, as it were, because it'll symbolize who I am, where I'm from, and, you know, wherever I travel to, it'll become quite it'll follow me in terms of bringing confidence to wherever I'm traveling. It will contain my history of who I am, where I'm from, and I think it's going to be one document, I think, that will be revolutionized, if I can use that term, in terms of what it symbolizes and the use of it going forward. So I miss it. I had to dig deep in my cupboard to try to get it. So, and it's usually on my pocket. So, yeah.
Great stuff. Thank you very much indeed, Cesar. So let's go over to Tim now. Last but not least, at the Radisson Hotel Group over there in Dubai. No pressure, but you know, let's see what you've got to reveal.
I like the passport one particularly, actually. I feel the same way about mine. I miss using it. But I had a couple of things that were in the office. First of all, this one, which is a bicycle. I'm a very keen cyclist, and for me, it symbolizes freedom and the freedom of traveling around. So I thought I'd show you this bike, but also I have this piece of original hand-painted art that I got on a trip to Rwanda in Kigali. So I thought cycling is a freedom of travel, and this represents the fabulous experiences that you can get when you get to new places. So they were the two things that I had in my office.
Nicely. Yeah, thank you very much, Tim. I'll resist the pun of saying on your bike because I don't want to say that, but thank you very much indeed for joining us, and thank you for bringing all those items with you. So that was Tim Cordon, Area Senior Vice President for Middle East and Africa at Radisson Hotel Group. Thank you very much indeed for joining us in the debate this afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Elcia Grandcourt, the Regional Director for Africa at the UNWTO. She joined us from Madrid. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity, Damon. Thank you.
Great, thanks to have you there. And also, last but not least, Sisa Ntshona, who's the Chief Executive Officer of South African Tourism, who joined us this afternoon in this debate from Johannesburg. Thank you very much indeed, Sisa.
Thank you, Damon, and hope to see you all soon.
And I hope you get to use your passport soon as well. And good luck with everything in South Africa. So thanks very much indeed to all of our guests. And thank you very much indeed to all of you, our audience, whether you're from Euronews or Africa News, for watching this debate this afternoon. It's clear that a lot's going on in Africa right now to prepare for this recovery and revival in travel and tourism, as we've been hearing, but still very much a long journey ahead, I think, as this pandemic continues to spike in the continent, but certainly a lot of things to look forward to in terms of getting travellers and tourists back over the coming months. Thanks very much indeed again for watching our latest debate, and if you want to catch it again, you can see it on our websites as well. But for now, thanks again and see you soon. Bye-bye.